The phone buzzed against the kitchen counter at 2:47 a.m., and I knew my marriage was over. Not because Vanessa was supposed to be in Boston on business, not because she'd been distant for months, treating our conversations like board meetings where I wasn't invited to speak. No, I knew it was over because of the name flashing on the screen, C, workout partner. My wife had never worked out a day in her life. I'm Eric Granger, and I built my tech company from nothing in this godforsaken Maine town where everyone knows everyone else's business. Except, apparently, I didn't know my own wife's business. The irony wasn't lost on me as I stared at that buzzing phone, sitting in the kitchen of the house I'd bought her. In the town where her family's name opened doors, mine never could. The text preview was enough. Can't wait to finish what we started in the boardroom tomorrow. Eric won't know what hit him. My hands didn't shake as I picked up the device. 20 years of building software companies teaches you to stay calm when systems crash. And brother, then this system was crashing hard. I scrolled through months of messages. Each one was a small knife twist, but I read them all with the methodical precision I use to debug code. There was Chad Barrett, my VP of operations, the golden boy I'd hired because Vanessa insisted we needed someone with better connections in the company. There were detailed plans about tomorrow's emergency board meeting. There were intimate details about their relationship that made my stomach turn. But the worst part? They were laughing at me, actually mocking the man who'd given them both their livelihoods. Poor Eric, one message read. Still thinks he's running his own company. Tomorrow's going to be such a shock. I set the phone down exactly where I'd found it and walked to my home office. If they wanted to play corporate games, they'd picked the wrong opponent. I hadn't clawed my way out of a trailer park and built a multi-million-dollar company by being naive about human nature. The next morning, Vanessa returned from her business trip with the kind of glow that comes from betraying your husband. She found me in the kitchen, drinking coffee and reading the newspaper like nothing had changed. "You're up early," she said, that practiced smile sliding across her face like oil on water. "Couldn't sleep," I replied, not looking up from the sports section. "Funny thing happened last night. Your phone kept buzzing." Her pause lasted exactly 2 seconds too long. "Oh, probably work emails." "From your workout partner?" The coffee mug in her hand stopped halfway to her lips. For just a moment, the mask slipped, and I saw the woman I'd married 15 years ago, the one who'd promised to stand by me when I was nobody. Then the mask snapped back into place. "I don't know what you're talking about." I folded the newspaper and finally looked at her. Really looked. The expensive highlights in her hair that I'd paid for. The designer clothes that my company's profits had bought. The diamond earrings I'd given her for our anniversary last month, while she was already planning to destroy me. "Vanessa," I said quietly. "We both know that's not true." Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. She laughed then, and it was the most honest sound she'd made in months. "Fine. You want the truth? Chad and I have been seeing each other, and yes, we've been planning some changes at the company, changes that are long overdue." "What kind of changes?" "The kind where people with actual business sense make the decisions. The kind where your little tech hobby becomes a real company with real leadership." She leaned against the counter, suddenly confident. "Face it, Eric. You're brilliant with computers, but you're terrible with people. You always have been." "So you decided to fix that by having an affair with my VP and staging a corporate coup?" "I decided to fix it by taking control before you run the company into the ground. The board agrees with me. We're calling an emergency meeting today, and when it's over, Chad will be CEO. You can stay on as CTO if you want, but the grown-ups are taking over." I nodded slowly, as if considering her words. "And us? Our marriage?" "That depends entirely on how reasonable you are about the transition." The audacity was breathtaking. She was offering to stay married to me as long as I accepted her lover as my boss and kept quiet about their affair. In her mind, this was a reasonable business proposition. "I see." I stood up and rinsed my coffee mug in the sink. Well, I suppose I should get to the office early then. Big day ahead. She looked surprised, maybe even disappointed. Had she wanted me to fight? To beg? To give her the dramatic confrontation that would justify what she'd already done? "That's it?" she asked. "What else is there to say? You've made your position clear. Now I need to figure out mine." I kissed her forehead like I had every morning for 15 years, grabbed my keys, and headed for the door. Behind me, I could feel her confusion, like a physical presence. She'd expected tears, anger, maybe even violence. Instead, she got the same calm professionalism I brought to every business challenge. What she didn't know was that I'd spent the last 4 hours of the night making phone calls to lawyers, accountants, and a few key clients. What she didn't know was that her emergency board meeting was about to become very interesting indeed. The drive to my office gave me time to think. Vanessa was right about one thing. I was terrible with people. I'd always preferred the clean logic of code to the messy complications of human relationships. But she'd made a critical error in her analysis. Being bad with people didn't mean I didn't understand them. It just meant I usually chose not to play their games. Today, I was going to play. The emergency board meeting was called for 10 a.m. in the conference room I'd designed myself. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the town where I'd built my reputation, one satisfied client at a time. The long oak table had hosted hundreds of meetings over the years, but none quite like this one. I arrived 30 minutes early, which was my habit. What wasn't my habit was the manila folder I carried, thick with documents that would change everything. I also wasn't in the habit of recording board meetings, but today I'd made an exception. The small device in my shirt pocket would capture every word. Vanessa arrived with Chad at exactly 10 o'clock. They'd coordinated their entrance, probably thinking it would demonstrate their united front. Chad wore his best suit, the one I'd seen him wear to client presentations. Vanessa had chosen her power outfit. Navy blue dress, pearl necklace, the kind of ensemble that said, "Trust me with your money." The other board members filed in behind them. Robert Hartwell, Vanessa's uncle, who'd invested early when I needed capital. Margaret Stone, the local bank president who'd joined the board for credibility. James Morrison, the lawyer who'd helped me incorporate. All of them people I'd thought were allies. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Vanessa began, taking her seat at the far end of the table. "We have some important matters to discuss regarding the future leadership of the company." I settled into my usual chair and opened my folder. "Before we begin, I'd like to distribute some materials for review." "That won't be necessary," Chad interrupted. "We've already prepared everything the board needs to see." "I'm sure you have." I smiled and began passing out copies of the documents I'd prepared. "But I think everyone should have complete information before making any decisions." Robert Hartwell glanced at the papers, then at his niece. "What exactly are we looking at here, Eric?" "Financial projections, client contracts, and some interesting correspondence I thought the board should see." I kept my voice level, professional. "Please, take a few minutes to review everything." The room grew quiet as they read. I watched their faces change as they absorbed the contents. The financial documents showed the company's actual performance versus the pessimistic projections someone had been sharing with them. The client contracts demonstrated our strong relationships and future revenue. And the correspondence? Well, that was the most interesting part. "These emails," Margaret Stone said slowly, "are these authentic?" "Completely. They detail a plan to artificially depress our stock value, force out current management, and install new leadership at below-market compensation. Quite clever, actually." Chad's face had gone pale. "Those are private communications taken out of context." "Are they? Let me read this one aloud." I picked up one of the printed emails. "Chad to Vanessa. Once we get Eric out, we can restructure the whole operation. The board doesn't understand the tech side anyway, so they'll have to trust our assessment of company value. We can buy out his shares for pennies on the dollar." The silence that followed was deafening. "There's more," I continued. "Discussions about which clients to approach with negative information about our stability, plans to poach key employees for a competing firm, even some interesting speculation about my personal life and how that might affect my leadership capabilities." Vanessa finally found her voice. "You had no right to access private communications." "You're absolutely right, which is why I didn't." I pulled out another document. "These were provided to me by someone concerned about the company's welfare. Someone who was approached about participating in this scheme and chose to come forward instead." I didn't mention that the someone was Chad's own assistant, who'd been copying his emails for weeks after he'd made some inappropriate advances. People always underestimate their assistants. "This is ridiculous," Chad said, standing up. "Eric, you're clearly desperate and trying to deflect attention from your own failures." "My failures?" I laughed, and it felt good. "Let's talk about failures, Chad. How about the Mitchell account you lost last month?" "Oh wait, you didn't lose it. You sabotaged it deliberately to make the company look unstable." "That's not—" "I have the client's statement. He was quite upset when he learned that our VP of operations had advised him to take his business elsewhere because of supposed financial irregularities that don't exist. The board members were looking at Chad and Vanessa like they'd never seen them before, which in a way they hadn't." Robert Hartwell cleared his throat. "Vanessa, is this true? Have you been working to undermine Eric's leadership?" My wife straightened in her chair, and for a moment I saw the woman who'd convinced me to marry her. confident, determined, absolutely certain she was right. "Uncle Robert, Eric has been struggling for months. The company needs new leadership, and sometimes difficult decisions require careful planning. Yes, Chad and I have been discussing the future, but everything we've done has been in the company's best interests." "Including your personal relationship?" Margaret Stone asked quietly. The question hung in the air like smoke. Vanessa's composure cracked just slightly. "My personal life has nothing to do with business decisions." "Doesn't it?" I opened my folder again. "Because these emails suggest otherwise. In fact, they suggest that your personal relationship with Chad has been the driving force behind this entire scheme." I began reading again. "Once Eric's out of the picture, we won't have to sneak around anymore. I'm tired of pretending to be happily married to someone who bores me to tears." Vanessa's face flushed red. "Stop. The best part is, he'll never see it coming. He's so focused on his precious code that he doesn't notice anything happening in the real world." I said, "Stop! By the time we're finished, he'll be lucky to get a job fixing computers at the mall." The room erupted. Robert Hartwell was shouting at his niece. Margaret Stone was demanding explanations. James Morrison was frantically taking notes, probably calculating legal liabilities. Through it all, Chad and Vanessa sat frozen, watching their carefully constructed plan crumble in real time. I waited for the noise to die down, then spoke into the sudden quiet. "There's one more thing you should all know. About an hour ago, I executed Article 11, Section B of our corporate bylaws." The color drained from every face in the room. "For those who don't remember," I continued, "that's the poison pill provision we installed 3 years ago. In the event of a hostile takeover attempt, all intellectual property, client contracts, and operational assets transfer to a separate entity controlled by the original founder." James Morrison was frantically flipping through his legal files. "Eric, that provision was designed to protect against external threats. It protects against any hostile takeover, internal or external." I smiled at the room full of people who'd been planning to betray me. "As of this morning, you're all welcome to vote me out as CEO. But you'll be CEO of an empty shell. The actual business belongs to me. The implications hit them like a physical blow. Without the intellectual property, client relationships, and operational systems, the company was worthless. They could have the name and the office building, but everything that generated revenue was now beyond their reach." Chad finally found his voice. "You can't do that. It's extortion." "It's business," I replied. "The same kind of hardball tactics you were planning to use against me. The only difference is I'm better at it than you are." I stood up and gathered my papers. "I'll be in my office if anyone wants to discuss terms for reversing this action. But I should mention that those terms will include Chad's immediate termination and a full disclosure of this scheme to our clients and partners." As I reached the door, Vanessa called out, "Eric, wait, we can work this out. We can fix this." I turned back to look at her, my wife of 15 years sitting next to her lover, surrounded by the wreckage of their betrayal. "No, Vanessa, we really can't." The aftermath of the board meeting was swift and brutal. Within 2 hours, Chad had cleaned out his office and left the building, escorted by security at my request. The board members scattered like leaves in a hurricane, each one probably consulting their own lawyers about potential liability. Vanessa, however, stayed. I found her in my office when I returned from lunch, sitting in the chair across from my desk like she belonged there. She'd been crying, which was unusual. In 15 years of marriage, I'd seen her cry maybe 3 times, and never over anything that actually mattered. "We need to talk," she said. "I think we covered everything in the meeting. Eric, please, sit down. Let me explain." I remained standing, leaning against the doorframe. "Explain what? How you and Chad plan to steal my company? How you've been mocking me for months while sleeping in my bed? How you thought I was too stupid to figure it out? It wasn't supposed to happen like this." "How was it supposed to happen?" She wiped her eyes with a tissue from the box on my desk. "Chad and it started innocently. Just working late, talking about the business. You were always so distant, so focused on your projects. I felt like I was married to a ghost. So you decided to have an affair. I decided to find someone who actually saw me, who appreciated what I brought to the relationship." Her voice grew stronger, more defensive. "And yes, we talked about the company. Chad had ideas, good ideas, about how to grow the business. You never listened to him. Because his ideas were terrible. They would have destroyed everything I built. They would have made us rich." The words hung between us like a challenge. Finally, the truth. Not love, not loneliness, not even revenge, just greed. "We are rich, Vanessa. The company is worth millions. But it could be worth tens of millions, hundreds of millions. If you'd just listen to people who understand business better than you do? I walked around my desk and sat down, studying my wife's face. People like Chad? People like me. She leaned forward, suddenly intense. Eric, I have an MBA from Wharton. I have connections throughout New England. I understand markets and growth strategies and corporate development. But you've never taken me seriously as anything more than a trophy wife. Because you've never shown any interest in the business until now. I showed interest. I made suggestions. I tried to get involved. But every time I brought up an idea, you'd pat me on the head and tell me you had it handled. I thought back over the years, trying to remember. Had she made suggestions? Had I dismissed them? The honest answer was probably yes. I'd been so focused on building and protecting what I'd created that I'd never considered bringing her into the process. So, you decided to take it from me instead of asking to be part of it. I decided to save it from you. Her tears had stopped, and now I was seeing the real Vanessa, the one who'd been hiding behind the dutiful wife facade. You're brilliant, Eric, but you're not a businessman. You're a technician. There's a difference. The difference being that technicians build things and business people steal them. The difference being that technicians create value and business people maximize it. I had to admit, there was a certain logic to her argument. I'd built the company by solving problems and satisfying clients, not by pursuing maximum profitability. Maybe she was right that I'd left money on the table. Okay, I said. Let's say you're right. Let's say I've been holding the company back with my small-town, customer-first approach. That still doesn't explain Chad. Her composure wavered again. Chad understood what I was trying to do. He supported my ideas. He made me feel valued. He made you feel desired. There's a difference. Don't patronize me. I'm not patronizing you, Vanessa. I'm trying to understand how my wife of 15 years decided that sleeping with my employee and stealing my company was a reasonable solution to feeling undervalued. She stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. Because talking to you is like talking to a wall. You make decisions without consulting anyone. You run the company like it's your personal hobby instead of a business with stakeholders and responsibilities. You treat everyone around you like they're children who couldn't possibly understand your brilliant vision. Everyone? Or just you? Everyone. Your employees, your clients, your wife, we're all just supporting characters in the Eric Granger story. The accusation stung because it contained enough truth to hurt. I had always been protective of my vision for the company. I had made most major decisions unilaterally. I had assumed that my technical expertise qualified me to lead in all areas. But that didn't justify what she'd done. So your solution was to stage a coup. My solution was to bring professional management to a company that desperately needed it. If you'd been willing to listen, we could have done it together. With Chad as CEO. With Chad as someone who understood how to run a business, yes? And with you as what? His wife? The question stopped her cold. She turned from the window to face me, and for the first time in the conversation, she looked genuinely ashamed. I don't know, she said quietly. We hadn't figured that part out yet. But you'd figured out how to steal my life's work. We'd figured out how to save it. The conversation was going in circles. She genuinely believed she'd been acting in everyone's best interest, including mine. In her mind, she was the hero of this story, rescuing a valuable company from its incompetent founder. Vanessa, do you love me? The question surprised her. What? It's not complicated. Do you love me? Have you ever loved me? Or was I just a convenient stepping stone to the life you wanted? She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I loved who I thought you could become, she said finally, but not who I am. Not who you chose to be. I nodded, feeling something settle into place in my chest. Not anger, not even sadness, just clarity. Then we're done. Eric, wait. We can fix this. I can call Chad, tell him it's over. We can restructure the company together, make it everything it should be. You handle the technical side, I handle the business side. We can be partners. No, we can't. Why not? I looked at my wife, this woman I'd shared my bed and my dreams with for 15 years, and saw a stranger. Because I don't trust you, and I never will again. She left without another word, and I sat alone in my office, watching the sun set over the town where I'd built my empire. Tomorrow, I would start the process of rebuilding it. Tonight, I would figure out how to destroy the people who'd tried to take it from me. Because Vanessa had been right about one thing. I wasn't just a technician anymore. I was learning to be a businessman, and my first order of business was revenge. The thing about small towns is that everyone talks, but nobody listens. People share secrets like they're trading baseball cards, never thinking about where those secrets might end up or how they might be used. I'd lived in this town for 20 years, but I'd never really participated in its social ecosystem. I went to work, came home, attended the occasional Chamber of Commerce meeting, and minded my own business. That had been a mistake. While I was building my company, other people were building networks of information and influence. Time to catch up. My first stop was Murphy's Tavern, the kind of blue-collar bar where construction workers and truck drivers gathered after their shifts to complain about their bosses and their wives. I'd never set foot in the place, but my friend Matt had been a regular for years. Matt Rodriguez was my oldest friend in town, a guy I'd met when I first arrived here with nothing but a computer and a dream. He'd helped me move into my first apartment, introduced me to local contractors when I bought my house, and served as best man at my wedding. He was also the most connected gossip in a 50-mile radius. I found him at his usual spot at the end of the bar, nursing a beer and watching a baseball game on the ancient television mounted in the corner. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," he said as I approached. "Eric Granger, slumming with the common folk. Buy you a drink?" "You can try, but I should warn you, this place doesn't serve wine with names you can't pronounce." I ordered 2 beers and settled onto the adjacent bar stool. "I need a favor." "Figured as much. You don't strike me as the type to develop a sudden interest in dive bars and sports." He studied my face in the mirror behind the bar. "This about the rumors going around town?" "What rumors?" "About your wife and that pretty boy from your office. About some kind of corporate drama at your company. About you walking into a board meeting this morning and scaring the pants off half the business community." I should have known the story would spread quickly. In a town this size, a corporate coup attempt was bigger news than the weather. "What exactly are people saying?" Matt took a long drink of his beer. "Depends who you ask. Vanessa's family is saying you've lost your mind, that you're sabotaging your own company out of spite. Your employees are saying she and Chad tried to steal the business and you outmaneuvered them. The neutral parties are saying they don't know what to believe, but it's the most interesting thing to happen around here in years." "What do you think?" "I think Vanessa always was too good-looking and too ambitious for a tech nerd from the wrong side of the tracks. I think she married you because you were going places, and now she's decided she can get there faster without you." It was a harsh assessment, but probably accurate. "The question is," Matt continued, "what are you going to do about it?" "I'm going to make them regret it." "Good." He raised his beer in a mock toast. "About time you grew some teeth. What do you need from me?" Over the next hour, I learned more about my wife's activities than I'd discovered in 15 years of marriage. Matt had a network of bartenders, waitresses, mechanics, and service workers who saw everything and remembered most of it. Through them, I learned that Vanessa and Chad had been meeting regularly at the Riverside Inn, an upscale restaurant 2 towns over. I learned that she'd been telling people for months that I was having financial problems and might have to sell the company. I learned that Chad had been interviewing for other jobs, probably as a backup plan in case their scheme failed. Most importantly, I learned that they'd made enemies. Chad had a reputation for arrogance and had offended several local business owners with his condescending attitude. Vanessa had alienated some of her old friends with her increasingly obvious sense of superiority. They'd isolated themselves without realizing it, making them vulnerable. "Ah, there's something else," Matt said as we prepared to leave. "Chad's got a gambling problem. Poker games, sports betting, probably other stuff. Word is he owes money to some people you don't want to owe money to." "How much money?" "Enough that taking over your company wasn't just about ambition, it was about survival." That put a different spin on things. Chad wasn't just an opportunistic Lothario. He was a desperate man who'd seen my wife and my company as solutions to his problems. "Matt, I need you to find out everything you can about Chad's debts. Who he owes, how much, when it's due. Can you do that?" "Probably. But Eric, if you're thinking about getting involved with those people, you should reconsider. They don't solve problems with lawyers and board meetings." "I'm not planning to get involved with them. I'm planning to make sure they stay involved with Chad." My next stop was Gloria Martinez, my executive assistant and the most observant person I'd ever met. She'd been with the company for 8 years and had a talent for noticing things that others missed. I found her at her desk despite the late hour, organizing files and preparing for tomorrow's damage control efforts. "Working late?" I asked. "Someone has to keep this place running while you're playing corporate warfare." She looked up from her computer. "How bad is it, Eric?" "Bad, but manageable. I need to ask you some questions about Chad and Vanessa." "Ask away." "How long have you known about their relationship?" Gloria sighed. "Officially? As of this morning. Unofficially? About 6 months. They weren't as discreet as they thought they were. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it wasn't my place, and because I hoped you'd figure it out on your own." She leaned back in her chair. "Also because I wasn't sure you'd believe me. You trusted them both completely. Too completely. Maybe, but that's not necessarily a character flaw, Eric. Most people don't expect their spouse and their VP to conspire against them. What else did you notice? Over the next 30 minutes, Gloria painted a detailed picture of the conspiracy. She'd observed private meetings, overheard phone conversations, and noticed changes in both Chad's and Vanessa's behavior. She'd also documented several instances where company information had been shared inappropriately, probably as part of their effort to build a case against my leadership. "There's one more thing," she said as I prepared to leave. "I've been monitoring our client communications, and someone has been reaching out to our biggest accounts with concerns about the company's stability. I can't prove it was Chad, but the timing matches his travel schedule." "Can you get me documentation? I already have it. Email logs, phone records, client complaints, everything you need to prove he was actively sabotaging the business." I stared at my assistant, this quiet, efficient woman who'd been protecting my interests while I was oblivious to the threats around me. "Gloria, why haven't you found a better job? You're wasted here," she smiled. "Because I believe in what you're building, Eric, and because someone needs to watch your back while you're busy changing the world." By the time I got home that night, I had a clear picture of what I was dealing with. This wasn't just a marital betrayal or a corporate power grab. It was a systematic campaign to destroy everything I'd built, orchestrated by people I'd trusted completely. Vanessa's car wasn't in the driveway, which was probably for the best. I needed time to think, to plan, and to decide just how far I was willing to go to protect what was mine. I poured myself a drink and sat in my study, surrounded by the awards and recognition I'd earned over the years. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of taking apart Chad Barrett and my wife, piece by piece. Not through violence or illegal activities, but through the same systematic approach I used to solve complex technical problems. They'd made one critical error in their planning. They'd assumed I was too naive and too passive to fight back effectively. They were about to learn that building a successful company requires more than technical skills. It requires the ability to identify threats, develop strategies, and execute plans with ruthless precision. I'd been a technician for 20 years. Time to become a businessman. Chad Barrett drove a silver Tesla Model S that he'd bought with his signing bonus when I hired him 2 years ago. He parked it in the reserved space closest to the building entrance, and he washed it every Saturday morning in his driveway like it was a religious ritual. Men like Chad define themselves by their possessions. Take away the symbols of their success, and you take away their confidence. At 3 a.m. on Thursday morning, Matt and I stood in the parking lot of Chad's apartment complex with a bag of tools and a cooler full of the most aromatic fish we could find at the local market. "You sure about this?" Matt whispered as we approached the Tesla. "Completely. Because if we get caught, I'm blaming you. If we get caught, getting arrested will be the least of our problems. Chad owes money to people who don't accept excuses." The beauty of modern luxury cars is that they're designed for convenience, not security. Chad's Tesla had keyless entry, automatic climate control, and a sophisticated air filtration system that would distribute our gift throughout the entire interior. We worked quickly and quietly. Matt handled the fish placement while I dealt with the more technical aspects of the operation. By the time we finished, Chad's pride and joy had been transformed into a very expensive seafood storage unit. "Phase 1 complete," I said as we packed up our tools. "What's Phase 2? Public humiliation." The next morning, I arrived at the office early and called an all-hands meeting. The entire staff gathered in the main conference room, curious about the sudden gathering and the events of the previous day. "I want to address the rumors that have been circulating about recent changes in company leadership," I began. "Yesterday, the board met to discuss a proposal that would have replaced me as CEO with Chad Barrett." Murmurs rippled through the room. Most of the employees had heard something, but few knew the details. During that meeting, we discovered that Chad had been engaged in activities designed to undermine the company's relationships with clients and partners. We also learned that he had been sharing confidential information with unauthorized parties. I distributed copies of the evidence Gloria had compiled: email logs, client complaints, documentation of Chad's sabotage efforts. Effective immediately, Chad Barrett is no longer employed by this company. His access to all systems has been revoked, and he is not permitted on company property. Jennifer Walsh, our head of marketing, raised her hand. "Eric, what about the clients he was managing?" "I'll be reaching out to each of them personally to explain the situation and ensure continuity of service. Gloria has prepared a detailed transition plan." "What about the board situation?" asked Tom Chen, our senior developer. "The board attempted to execute a hostile takeover based on false information provided by Chad. I've taken steps to protect the company's assets and ensure our continued independence. We'll be operating as usual, with some improvements to our oversight and security procedures. The meeting lasted another 30 minutes as I answered questions and reassured the staff about job security and the company's future. By the time it ended, the narrative was clear. Chad had been a bad actor who tried to damage the company for personal gain, and I'd protected everyone's interests by stopping him. Around 10 a.m., Gloria buzzed my intercom. "Eric, there's a call for you on line 2. It's Chad, and he sounds upset." I picked up the phone. "Chad, how can I help you?" "What did you do to my car?" His voice was strained, barely controlled. "I'm sorry, what?" "My car smells like a fish market. There's some kind of horrible stench that won't go away. The dealership says the entire interior will have to be replaced." "That's terrible. Have you considered that it might be related to your recent dietary choices?" "Don't play games with me, Eric. I know you did this." "Chad, I think the stress of recent events might be affecting your judgment. Why would I care about your car?" "Because you're trying to destroy me." "I'm trying to protect my company from people who would harm it. If you're feeling destroyed, maybe you should examine your own actions." There was a long pause. "This isn't over." "Actually, it is. You're unemployed, you're facing potential legal action for corporate sabotage, and your reputation in this industry is finished. I'd suggest you focus on finding a new career path." I hung up and immediately called our lawyer to document the threatening phone call. Everything Chad did from this point forward would be recorded and potentially used against him. The second phase of my plan required more subtlety. I needed to isolate Chad and Vanessa socially, to make them pariahs in the community where they'd thought they could build their new life together. I started with the country club where Vanessa and I had been members for 10 years. A quiet conversation with the club president about my wife's affair and Chad's financial problems was enough to ensure that their application for couples membership would be denied. Word would spread quickly through the club's social network. Next, I reached out to several local business owners who'd had negative interactions with Chad. I didn't have to lie or exaggerate. I simply shared the documented evidence of his attempts to sabotage client relationships and let them draw their own conclusions. By Friday afternoon, Chad Barrett was persona non grata in the local business community. His professional reputation was destroyed, his personal life was in shambles, and his financial problems were becoming public knowledge. But I wasn't finished. Friday evening, I attended the monthly Chamber of Commerce mixer, something I'd avoided for years. This time, I worked the room like a politician, sharing my story with anyone who would listen. Not the bitter complaints of a wronged husband, but the measured analysis of a business owner who'd uncovered corporate espionage. "It's unfortunate," I told Margaret Stone over cocktails. "Chad seemed like such a promising addition to the team, but when someone starts sharing confidential client information with competitors, you have to act quickly to protect your business." "Of course," she agreed. "You can't let that kind of behavior go unpunished." "The personal aspects are even more disappointing," I continued. "I trusted both of them completely. I never imagined they would betray that trust so thoroughly." By the end of the evening, I'd spoken with 30 of the most influential people in town. Each conversation was carefully crafted to present me as the victim of a coordinated attack by two people they'd thought they could trust. The story would be all over town by Monday morning. Saturday morning, I was drinking coffee and reading the newspaper when Vanessa came downstairs. She'd been staying in the guest bedroom since our confrontation, and we'd barely spoken in 3 days. "We need to talk," she said. "About what?" "About what you're doing to Chad." I looked up from the sports section. "I'm not doing anything to Chad. Chad did everything to himself. His car, his reputation, his job prospects. You're systematically destroying his life." "I'm systematically protecting my business and my personal interests. If Chad's life is being destroyed, it's because of choices he made." She sat down across from me, and I could see the exhaustion in her face. "Eric, this has to stop. Whatever you're planning, whatever revenge you think you need, it has to stop." "Why?" "Because you're better than this. Because the man I married wouldn't deliberately hurt people, even people who'd hurt him. The man you married was naive. He trusted people who didn't deserve it and ignored warning signs that should have been obvious. That man got his company stolen and his wife seduced by his own employee. That man built something amazing from nothing. That man earned the respect of his community and the loyalty of his employees. Don't throw that away for revenge." I folded the newspaper and really looked at her. "Vanessa, do you think there's any way we can fix this? Any way we can go back to what we had?" She was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know. Maybe. If you can forgive me. If we can find a way to work together instead of against each other." And Chad? Chad was a mistake. A terrible mistake that I regret completely. But you don't regret trying to take my company. Another pause. I regret the way we did it. I don't regret thinking the company needed better business leadership. There it was, the fundamental disconnect that made reconciliation impossible. She was sorry for the betrayal, but she still believed she'd been right about the underlying issues. Then we don't have anything to work with, I said. Eric, please, don't let anger turn you into someone you'll hate. I stood up and rinsed my coffee cup in the sink. I'm not angry, Vanessa. Anger is an emotion. This is business. Monday morning brought news that Chad had been evicted from his apartment. Apparently his financial problems were worse than anyone had realized, and the recent loss of his job had triggered a cascade of consequences. Word around town was that he'd moved in with his brother in the next county, a step down that must have wounded his considerable pride. Vanessa had left early, probably to meet with her family and plan their next move. I'd heard through Matt's network that the Hartwells were furious about the public embarrassment and were considering legal action against me. Let them try. I had documentation of everything, and their own actions had created the situation. I was reviewing quarterly reports when Gloria buzzed my intercom. Eric, there's a woman here to see you. Says her name is Patricia Barrett, and she's Chad's wife. I'd forgotten that Chad was married. He'd never mentioned his wife in casual conversation, and she'd never attended company events. Now she was standing in my office, a thin woman with tired eyes and the kind of desperation that comes from watching your life fall apart. Mr. Granger, thank you for seeing me. Please, sit down. How can I help you? I want to know what my husband did to you. The directness surprised me. I'm not sure I understand. Chad won't tell me what happened. He just says there was a misunderstanding at work and that you're trying to destroy him. But I know my husband, Mr. Granger. I know when he's lying, and I know when he's scared. Right now, he's both. I studied her face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. All I saw was a woman who wanted the truth. Mrs. Barrett, your husband was having an affair with my wife. They were also planning to force me out of my own company and install Chad as CEO. When I discovered their plan, I took steps to protect my business and my interests. She nodded slowly, as if confirming something she'd already suspected. The affair? How long? At least 6 months, probably longer. And the company thing? I showed her copies of the emails and financial documents. She read them carefully, her expression growing harder with each page. He's been telling me that you were jealous of his success and trying to frame him for corporate sabotage. Your husband was sabotaging client relationships and sharing confidential information. I have documentation from multiple sources. Why are you showing me this? It was a fair question. Why was I sharing evidence with the wife of my enemy? Because you deserve to know the truth, and because you're not responsible for your husband's choices. She was quiet for several minutes, staring at the papers in her lap. Mr. Granger, I've been married to Chad for 12 years. I know he's ambitious and sometimes ruthless, but I never thought he'd do something like this. People surprise us. Yes, they do. She looked up at me. What happens now? That depends on what you and Chad decide to do. If he leaves town quietly and doesn't cause any more problems, I'm willing to let this end here. If he continues to make threats or tries to retaliate, I'll pursue every legal option available. And my marriage? That's between you and him? She gathered up the papers and stood to leave. Mr. Granger, I'm sorry for what Chad did to you and your wife, and I'm sorry for what your wife did to you. Nobody deserves that kind of betrayal. After she left, I sat alone in my office, thinking about the conversation. Patricia Barrett had reminded me that there were innocent victims in this situation, people whose lives were being damaged by choices they hadn't made, but that didn't change what I had to do. Tuesday brought the next phase of my campaign. I'd scheduled lunch with 3 of our biggest clients, ostensibly to reassure them about the recent changes in company leadership. In reality, I wanted to make sure they understood exactly what Chad had tried to do to their accounts. I want you to know that we've identified and corrected the security breach that led to some of the communication problems you experienced last month, I told Robert Mitchell, CEO of our largest client. Security breach? Our former VP of Operations was sharing confidential account information with unauthorized parties. We believe he was trying to create instability that would justify a change in company leadership. Mitchell's face darkened. Are you telling me that Chad Barrett was deliberately sabotaging our account? I'm telling you that we found evidence of unauthorized information sharing and deliberate miscommunication with your team. The situation has been resolved, but I wanted you to be aware of what happened. I want copies of everything you have. If Barrett was playing games with our account, I want to know exactly what he did. By the end of the week, 3 major clients had filed formal complaints against Chad with the State Business Licensing Board. His reputation in the industry was finished, and any hope of finding comparable employment was gone. But Vanessa was proving more resilient than her lover. She'd moved back in with her family and was reportedly consulting with lawyers about divorce proceedings and potential lawsuits against me. The Hartwell family had money and connections, and they weren't going to accept their public humiliation quietly. Friday afternoon, I received a call from James Morrison, the lawyer who'd helped me incorporate the company years earlier. "Eric, I need to give you a heads up. I've been contacted by the Hartwell family's attorney. They're considering several legal actions against you." "What kind of legal actions?" "Wrongful termination, defamation, intentional interference with business relationships. They're also questioning the validity of your Article 11 action and threatening to challenge it in court." "Do they have a case?" "On the wrongful termination, probably not. Chad was an at-will employee, and you have documentation of his misconduct. On the defamation, it depends on whether you can prove everything you've been saying about him." "I can." "Good. The business interference claim is more complicated, but again, if you can show that you were protecting legitimate business interests, you should be fine." "And Article 11? That's the big one. If they can convince a judge that you used the poison pill provision improperly, they might be able to reverse it. That would put you back where you started, except now you'd be facing a hostile board with a legitimate grievance." I thanked James and hung up, then spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing my legal position. The Hartwells were right to focus on Article 11. It was the foundation of my defense, and if it crumbled, everything else would collapse with it. That evening, I met Matt at Murphy's Tavern to discuss the situation. "So they're lawyering up?" he said after I'd explained the latest developments. "Looks like it. You worried?" "Concerned. If they can reverse the Article 11 action, I lose control of the company assets. At that point, they can force me out and install whoever they want as CEO." "Even after everything that's come out about Chad and Vanessa?" "The board might decide that Chad was a bad choice, but that doesn't mean they'll keep me in charge. They could bring in an outside CEO and still achieve their original goal." Matt took a long drink of his beer. "Sounds like you need to make sure that doesn't happen." "I need to make sure the board understands that their interests are better served by keeping me in place." "How do you do that?" "By making the alternative unacceptable." Over the next 2 hours, we developed a plan that would ensure the Hartwell family's legal challenge would be their last mistake. It was risky, potentially destructive, and absolutely necessary. "You sure about this?" Matt asked as we prepared to leave. "No, but I'm sure about what happens if I don't do it. And if it backfires. Then I lose everything anyway, but at least I go down fighting." Monday morning, I implemented the final phase of my strategy. It would either secure my position permanently or destroy everything I'd built over the past 20 years. But after everything that had happened, those seemed like acceptable odds. The Hartwell family had built their wealth over 3 generations through a combination of real estate development, political connections, and what locals politely called aggressive business practices. Robert Hartwell, Vanessa's uncle and my former board member, controlled a network of construction companies, rental properties, and municipal contracts that made him one of the most powerful men in the county. He was also, as I'd discovered through careful research, involved in several business practices that wouldn't survive close scrutiny. Monday morning, I drove to the offices of the Portland Press-Herald, the largest newspaper in Maine. I'd called ahead and arranged a meeting with investigative reporter Sarah Chen, a woman with a reputation for exposing corruption in small-town politics. "Mr. Granger, thank you for coming in. I understand you have information about municipal contracting irregularities?" I opened my briefcase and removed a thick folder of documents. "I have evidence of bid rigging, kickbacks, and tax evasion involving several construction projects in our county. The pattern goes back at least 5 years and involves millions of dollars in public funds." Sarah's eyes widened as she reviewed the materials. Bank records, email communications, contract documents, and witness statements that painted a detailed picture of systematic corruption. "How did you obtain this information?" "Through a combination of public records requests, private investigation, and information provided by concerned citizens. Everything here is legally obtained and independently verifiable." "Why are you bringing this to me now?" "Because the people involved are trying to destroy my business and my reputation through frivolous lawsuits and false accusations. I believe the public has a right to know who they're really dealing with." I spent the next 2 hours walking Sarah through the evidence, explaining the connections between various players and helping her understand the scope of the corruption. By the time I left, she was already making phone calls to editors and fact-checkers. The story would run in Sunday's edition, giving me exactly 1 week to prepare for the consequences. Tuesday morning, I received an unexpected visitor. Robert Hartwell himself appeared in my office, unannounced and clearly agitated. "We need to talk," he said, closing the door behind him. "About what?" "About the mistake you're about to make." I leaned back in my chair, studying the man who'd helped fund my company's early growth and who was now trying to destroy it. "I'm not sure what you mean." "I mean the reporter who's been calling my office asking questions about construction contracts and municipal relationships. I mean the private investigator who's been interviewing my former employees. I mean whatever scorched earth campaign you think you're running." "Robert, I think you're overestimating my influence. I'm just a small-town tech CEO trying to protect his business." "Cut the crap, Eric. I know you're behind this, and I know what you're trying to do, but you're playing with fire, and you're going to get burned." "Is that a threat?" "It's a warning. You think you can destroy my family because you're angry about Vanessa and Chad? You think you can use the media to fight battles you can't win in court?" I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the town where I'd built my life. "Robert, your family tried to steal my company. Your niece betrayed our marriage. Your legal team is threatening frivolous lawsuits designed to bankrupt me through legal fees. What exactly did you expect me to do?" "I expected you to be reasonable, to accept that sometimes business relationships change and that fighting those changes only makes things worse for everyone." "Reasonable." I turned back to face him. "Like it was reasonable for Vanessa and Chad to plan my removal behind my back? Like it was reasonable for them to sabotage client relationships to justify their actions? That was Chad's idea, not ours. We just wanted better leadership for the company." "You wanted control of a profitable business that you didn't build and didn't understand." Robert's composure cracked slightly. "Eric, you're a smart guy, but you're naive about how the world works. Sometimes you have to make deals with people you don't like to protect what matters most. What are you offering?" "Drop whatever you're planning with the newspaper. Stop the harassment campaign against Chad. Accept a reasonable settlement in the divorce proceedings. In exchange, we'll drop the legal challenges and leave you in control of the company." "And Vanessa?" "Vanessa made her choices. She'll have to live with the consequences." It was a tempting offer. I could keep my company, end the legal threats, and move on with my life. All I had to do was let the Hartwell family's corruption continue unchallenged and allow Chad to escape consequences for his actions. No deal. "Eric, think about what you're doing. You're not just attacking me or my family. You're attacking an entire network of relationships that keeps this community functioning. You bring down those relationships, and a lot of innocent people get hurt. The only people who get hurt are the ones who've been profiting from corruption and fraud. You're making a mistake. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make." Robert stood to leave, then paused at the door. "Eric, I've been in business for 40 years. I've seen what happens to people who don't know when to stop fighting. They lose everything, and they take everyone around them down too." After he left, I sat alone in my office, second-guessing my decision. Robert was right that exposing his family's corruption would have consequences beyond my personal situation. Jobs would be lost, contracts would be canceled, and people who depended on the Hartwell network would suffer. But some fights are worth the collateral damage. Wednesday brought news that Chad had been arrested on gambling-related charges in the next county. Apparently his debts had caught up with him, and he'd been caught trying to place bets with money he didn't have. The arrest made the local news, adding another layer of humiliation to his already destroyed reputation. Thursday, Patricia Barrett called to thank me for my honesty during our earlier meeting. She'd filed for divorce and was seeking full custody of their children. Chad's gambling addiction and infidelity had given her grounds for a favorable settlement, and she wanted me to know that she appreciated my discretion in not making their personal problems public. Friday afternoon, I received advance copies of Sunday's newspaper article. Sarah Chen had done excellent work, connecting dots and exposing patterns that even I hadn't fully understood. The story would destroy Robert Hartwell's political influence and probably result in criminal charges against several people in his network, but it would also end any possibility of reconciliation with Vanessa's family. Saturday evening, Vanessa came to the house to collect more of her belongings. We hadn't spoken since our conversation the previous weekend, and the tension between us was palpable. "I heard about the newspaper story," she said as she packed clothes into a suitcase. "I figured you would. Eric, please tell me you're not really going to destroy my family over this." I looked at my wife, this woman I'd loved for 15 years, and felt nothing but sadness. "Vanessa, your family tried to destroy me first. I'm just defending myself." "By ruining innocent people? By ending careers and destroying reputations? By exposing corruption and fraud that should have been stopped years ago." She finished packing and turned to face me. "This isn't you, Eric. The man I married wouldn't do something like this. The man you married trusted people who didn't deserve it. The man you married got betrayed by his wife and his employee and almost lost everything he'd worked for. Maybe it's time for that man to learn some new skills. And if those skills turn you into someone you hate, then at least I'll be someone who fights back." She left without another word, and I knew it was the last time I'd see her as my wife. Sunday morning, the story broke across the front page of the state's largest newspaper. Within hours, it was being picked up by regional media and shared across social networks. By noon, reporters were camped outside Robert Hartwell's office, and the state attorney general's office was announcing a formal investigation. My phone rang constantly throughout the day. Reporters wanting comments, lawyers offering services, business associates expressing shock and concern. I ignored most of the calls, but answered when Matt called. "Well, you did it," he said. "The whole Hartwell empire is crashing down." "Good. You sure about that?" "Because there's no going back from this, Eric. You've made enemies who won't forget and won't forgive." "I made those enemies when I refused to let them steal my company." "Maybe, but now you've escalated things to a level where somebody's going to get seriously hurt. Better them than me." Monday morning brought the consequences I'd expected. Robert Hartwell's lawyer called to inform me that all legal challenges against my company were being dropped and that the Hartwell family would not contest my divorce from Vanessa. They were too busy dealing with criminal investigations to worry about corporate disputes. Chad Barrett, facing his own legal problems, had apparently fled the state rather than deal with both gambling debts and potential criminal charges related to the corruption investigation. By Tuesday, I was the sole owner and operator of my company, free from board oversight and legal challenges. I'd won completely and decisively, but victory felt different than I'd expected. Emptier, more complicated. Wednesday afternoon, I was working late when Gloria knocked on my office door. "Eric, there's someone here to see you. She says it's important." The visitor was Patricia Barrett, Chad's soon-to-be ex-wife. She looked exhausted and defeated, but determined. "Mr. Granger, I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For showing me who my husband really was. For giving me the evidence I needed to protect my children. For helping me understand that I wasn't crazy to think something was wrong." "You don't need to thank me for that." "Yes, I do. Because without your investigation, I never would have learned about the gambling, the other women, the financial problems. I would have kept making excuses and pretending everything was fine." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I also wanted to tell you that Chad is gone. He left the state yesterday, and I don't think he's coming back. Whatever debts he had, whoever he was afraid of, he decided running was better than facing the consequences. I'm sorry you and your children have to deal with that. We're better off without him. It took me a long time to realize it, but we're better off." After she left, I sat alone in my office, thinking about the wreckage I'd created over the past few weeks. Chad was gone, his life destroyed. The Hartwell family was facing criminal charges and financial ruin. Vanessa had lost her marriage, her family's support, and her social standing. I'd won every battle and achieved every goal I'd set for myself. So why did I feel so empty? The answer came to me as I watched the sun set over the town where I'd built my empire. I'd spent so much energy on revenge that I'd forgotten what I was fighting for. I'd been so focused on destroying my enemies that I'd lost sight of what I wanted to build. Tomorrow, I would start the process of rebuilding. Not just my company, but my life. I would figure out what came after revenge, what came after victory. Tonight, I would sit in my empty house and acknowledge the cost of winning. Because sometimes, getting everything you want is the loneliest feeling in the world.